Welcome, dear viewers. For more exciting stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. Pour yourself a coffee, relax, take a deep breath, and let's get started. I wasn't supposed to access that file. Everything that happened after began with that single unremarkable click, a click I justified in the moment as nothing more than professional curiosity. I had the clearance, I had the credentials, no one was watching. At least, I thought no one was watching. I was stationed at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, working as a senior geophysicist in the Lunar Anomalies Analysis Division, a relatively new subdepartment that didn't even have its own logo yet. My days were quiet, filled with dense telemetry logs, seismic models, and signal noise filtration. I liked the silence of the data. It was the only kind of noise that made sense. Our division had been tasked with analyzing post-mission telemetry from Artemis 3. The crew hadn't even landed yet. Their departure was still weeks out, but remote sensors embedded in the pre-deployment rover system were already collecting data on Mare Tranquillitatis. A microquake anomaly had been flagged at 17.4 kilometers depth, something they assumed to be either a sensor glitch or residual stress from an old impact basin. I didn't think much of it at first. The anomaly repeated every 3.8 seconds, a soft, harmonic oscillation that didn't align with any known tectonic behaviors, not even lunar ones. The moon doesn't breathe. It contracts slowly, glacially in response to thermal cycling. But this pattern felt intentional. The seismic waveform had a rhythm that I couldn't ignore. I ran it through FFT analysis, fast Fourier transform. To isolate the frequency components, it wasn't noise, it was structured, too structured. That's when I found the reference. A line of metadata embedded deep in the packet header. Source reference, Lock 14, Nemesis Protocol. It wasn't a standard tag. In fact, it wasn't part of any known data taxonomy used by NASA or affiliated contractors. I only recognized the word lock from an offhand conversation I'd overheard once during a conference in Langley years ago. A systems engineer had whispered it over drinks, joking about black box logs they keep for God himself. I shouldn't have searched for it, but I did. At 02:41 a.m. on March 9th, I connected to the internal archive using my temporary elevated clearance. I typed Lock 14 into the retrieval console and was prompted for a biometric override. I gave it my retinal scan. The system accepted it without hesitation. No one had flagged the permissions table. That was the first red flag, or the last warning. The directory opened. There were 7 files, all audio logs, no timestamps, no authorship metadata, just waveform files labeled with strings of alphanumeric codes. I opened the first one. Silence. Then static. Then a tone. Not a sine wave. It had overtones, complex ones, like a voice buried inside an instrument not designed for human music. It repeated every 3.8 seconds, identical to the signal from the Artemis logs. But this version was different. It was layered. In the spectrogram analysis, I saw an additional frequency pattern, something embedded within the tone itself. When I isolated it and slowed the playback, I felt my stomach turn cold. It was a phoneme, not a word. Not even a language per se, but a vocal shape that mimicked something deeply familiar. It was saying a name, my name. Ian. I froze. The lab around me was silent. My heartbeat was so loud in my ears I almost didn't hear the automated alert from the system, a red bar flashing on the corner of my screen. External device access detected. Someone else was connected to the terminal remotely. I terminated the session and disconnected the console. Then I sat in the dark for what felt like hours. I told myself I'd hallucinated it, that I'd misinterpreted the signal. Pareidolia, audio projection, the mind-hearing patterns in white noise. But my analysis wasn't subjective. It was mathematical, repeatable, reproducible, and worse, it was ancient. I cross-referenced the waveform against known signal archetypes from previous lunar missions. Nothing matched, until I expanded the parameters to include redacted datasets from Apollo telemetry archives. That's when I found it. Apollo 17, the last manned mission to the Moon. Officially, it carried out geological surveys and deployed surface experiments. Unofficially, there was a second mission objective, buried under innocuous scientific language: deep subsurface radar reflectometry below Mare Tranquillitatis Basin. That location again. A backdoor archive, untouched since 1974, contained partial logs from Lieutenant Colonel Russell Haynes, the mission's chief pilot. His entries were fragmented, deteriorated by time and poor encryption, but one sentence survived intact. Something is under the basin. It isn't dead rock. It listens. We felt it. The logs were immediately pulled from my terminal. Not deleted, extracted externally. The cursor moved on its own. A kill command executed. I was locked out. I reported nothing. Not to Dr. Sales, not to IT, not even to my clearance handler. The next morning, my laptop's boot partition was corrupted. My Wi-Fi reset to factory settings, and when I checked my browser history, every link I'd visited the night before was gone, except for one, burned into the cache like a scar. Clock 14, Nemesis Protocol. I left work early that day. I remember walking through the parking lot, hands shaking, my access badge burning against my chest like it knew something I didn't. I couldn't stop hearing the signal, that tone, repeating in my head like tinnitus tuned to the exact frequency of paranoia. I didn't sleep that night. At 3:12 a.m. I heard a soft knock at my door. No one was there. But someone had left an envelope, placed carefully on the welcome mat like an offering. No return address. No stamps. Inside was a folded page. Printed map of the moon. Topographic old, maybe from the late 70s, with a single red mark. Coordinates: 22.6 degree, 17.4 degree E, Mare Tranquillitatis. The exact depth matched the seismic anomaly, 17.4 kilometers. I don't know who left it. I never found out. I kept the map hidden in a book in my study, between pages of a manual on lunar geology that no one else had ever touched. I wanted to believe this was some elaborate prank, an inside joke among bored engineers. But no one knew I'd accessed that file. And no one could have faked that signal. I spent the next day running simulations. I tried every logical explanation: resonance from deep fractures, harmonic amplification through hollow lava tubes, solar interference patterns. Nothing fit. The geometry of the wave was too precise, too intentional. It wasn't natural, it wasn't geological, it was broadcasting. I went to Dr. Sales with my findings, cautiously omitting the file name, the logs, the envelope. I showed her the waveform, the correlation with the Apollo telemetry. She stared at it for maybe 6 seconds. Then she said, without even looking at me, "This isn't within your scope, Ian. Stick to your assigned modules." She closed the file. I wasn't reprimanded. I wasn't questioned. But that same evening, my personal email account was disabled. My phone began showing blank notifications from unnamed senders, and my smart home system began updating itself at irregular hours, even when disconnected from the router. Someone, or something, had noticed me. The next morning I returned to the lab early. I tried to re-access the Lock 14 directory. It was gone, erased from the archive index. The system didn't even recognize the string anymore. So I tried something else. I pulled the raw signal from the Artemis array again. This time, I didn't run it through the standard filters. I inverted it, reversed it, folded it along harmonic sublayers. What emerged wasn't a tone. It was a message, not in English, not in any human language. But I understood it, or rather I felt it. Like memory, like grief. Like the moment just before waking from a nightmare and realizing you've brought something back with you. I don't know how to explain what it said, not with words, but I can tell you what I felt in that moment. Do not come back. You are not alone. You never were. I found out we'd been there before through a glitch. Not a metaphorical one. A literal checksum mismatch in the archival server's redundancy system. The anomaly forced a shadow directory to unseal itself for 43 seconds during a batch data migration. That's all it took. Just long enough for me to see the label, Astra Veil, operational log, Apollo 17 unofficial excavation. I screen captured the file index before it was resealed. No one noticed, or if they did, no one said anything. The directory referenced a sub-operation within the Apollo 17 mission that had never appeared in public NASA documentation. The log titles were curt, unsentimental: Deep Bore Test 2, Thermal. Anomaly charting, subjective exposure reports, phase interference matrix. One entry in particular stood out. A set of scanned journal pages marked Personal Haynes R. Lieutenant Cole Russell Haynes, the pilot of Apollo 17's lunar module. Officially, he died in 1980 in a residential fire. But these notes were dated 1973, months after his return. I had to see them. I used my remaining clearance cache to submit a silent request through the internal archival assistant. That's what we called it, the assistant. No one knew if it was a person or a script. Requests were either granted or not, and no explanation was ever given. This one was granted. The scan was poor quality, faded typewriter ink, handwritten. Annotations in blue ink shaking. Page 1 was mostly procedural. Mentions of pressure readings, complaints about suit integrity, discrepancies in environmental control systems. But the second page. At 42:37:10 Met, we reached the trench. Limit: instruments showed a thermal profile inconsistent with surface readings. Beneath the regolith, 12 meters down, the composition was metallic, not meteoric, geometric. We dug through geometry. His words, not mine. I saw it. We both saw it. It bent around us, sound changed inside, no echo, like it absorbed intention. I felt watched, not seen, watched. The difference matters. We didn't speak after that. The document ended with a torn corner. Below the final line, a single handwritten sentence. It's not dormant. We just stopped listening. I tried printing the file. The command executed, but nothing came out. When I checked the office printer queue, the document had been removed, replaced with a generic job titled NASA Team Building Agenda.pdf. I returned to my workstation to find Dr. Sales waiting. She didn't speak at first, just looked at me as if deciding how much I already knew. Then she smiled, a thin, procedural smile, and said, "System maintenance today. Everything." "Backed up?" I nodded. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Good, keep your head down, Ian." That was the moment I knew she wasn't going to stop me, but she wouldn't protect me either. I didn't go home that night. I booked a room under a fake name in Silver Spring, used cash, left my phone behind. At 02:16 a.m., my laptop, offline. Radio dead, no connectivity, powered itself on. A terminal window opened. Text began to scroll, "You are not cleared for Nemesis." Then the screen went black. When I rebooted it manually, every file was gone. Every file, even the system logs, had been scrubbed. The hard drive was reduced to 87 kilobytes of unidentifiable data, a single executable called mirrorspeak.exe. I didn't run it. I couldn't. The next morning, I found a plain envelope under my hotel room door, same as before. No address, no markings. Inside, a printed lunar map, same coordinates, same red mark. But this one had something new, a hand-drawn circle around a region labeled Echo Trench. I didn't remember that name from any official charts, but when I checked the map's metadata watermark, I felt my stomach turn. The document was dated July 6, 1973. 12 days after the last entry in Haynes's journal. I needed help. Tommy Brennan had been out of NASA for almost 4 years. He'd left after a quiet but public disagreement with mission planning over software throttling during Artemis II's telemetry freeze. I knew him from a shared systems integration course at MIT, and we'd stayed loosely in touch since. He was brilliant, impulsive, deeply paranoid, the kind of person who would believe me before asking questions. He met me in a diner near Laurel. When I showed him the waveform printout from Lock 14, his eyes didn't blink for 12 seconds. "That's not noise," he said. "That's compression layering. Someone's masking real-time modulation. See here? That's a header signature. It's not even Earth standard." I asked what he meant. Tommy looked around, leaned closer. That's not our protocol. It's not human. I told him about the audio layer, the name, my name. He went quiet. Then he said, they've been using the moon as a reflector, like a passive relay, but what if it's not just bouncing signals? What if it's interpreting them? We decided to test it. Tommy had access to legacy infrared scans from Apollo era, satellites stored on external drives he'd borrowed after his resignation. We cross-referenced thermal anomalies from 1972 to 2023, overlaid on Mare Tranquillitatis. The data showed consistent fluctuations at the marked coordinates, not random but rhythmic. Pulses, 12-mile radius, interior delta of nearly 0.6 degrees Celsius every 3.8 seconds, no external source, no solar correlation, and no known volcanic or geothermal explanation. The moon is geologically dead. We weren't looking at a natural formation, we were looking at a structure. I asked Tommy what kind of structure could remain undetected for 50 years. He didn't answer. He just stared at the screen and whispered, "It breathes." We were planning to run deeper signal decomposition when Tommy excused himself to use the bathroom. He never came back. His laptop was still open, coffee still warm, but he was gone. I called his name, checked the parking lot. His car was still there. Security footage from the diner was missing. The manager said the system had glitched and failed to record anything that day. I asked to see it anyway. He refused. When I got back to my motel, my keycard failed. Management said I had checked out that morning. I hadn't. Inside the room, all my things were gone. Only one item remained, placed neatly on the bed. Tommy's phone, no lock screen, no passcode. Only one file remained in local storage, a single image. It showed a smooth metallic corridor, curving impossibly, like a torus inside out. No seams, no lighting, but everything was visible. And at the far end, barely perceptible in the shadows, something stood watching, not a person, not even a shape I could identify. Just a displacement in space, like light avoided it. I shut the phone off. I haven't turned it back on since. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. They didn't leave a message. But my voicemail indicator lit up. I listened to it once. It was my own voice, not recent. Recorded days before I accessed the Lock 14 directory. The tone was flat, devoid of emotion, like someone repeating words under duress. We found it. We opened it. It's not a building. It's a warning. Then a long pause. Then a breath. Then silence. I don't remember ever recording that message. I don't know how they got my voice, but I know what I said, and I know I meant it. The structure breathes. That's the only phrase that feels true now. Everything else, the coordinates, the data, even Tommy's disappearance, flickers, in and out of clarity like corrupted frames in a film reel. But that phrase returns to me in every silence, every dream. The structure breathes. After Tommy vanished, I knew I couldn't return to Goddard. Not yet. Whatever he uncovered, whatever image was on that phone, it made him a target. That meant I was next. So I did the only thing I could. I buried myself in the data. I spent 3 straight nights in a borrowed lab at an abandoned weather satellite facility Tommy once showed me in Lanham. He'd set it up as a fallback workspace years ago, retrofitting old servers to run off local power and satellite uplinks. It still worked. Barely. Using thermal imaging data recovered from Artemis III's surface rovers, I constructed a volumetric model of Mare Tranquillitatis. Layer by layer, I stripped away the regolith, extrapolated density maps, and rendered a 3-dimensional negative space centered on the coordinates from the envelope. What emerged was not a cavern, it was a chamber, perfectly geometric. 12 miles wide at its longest axis, with fractal recesses repeating at scales down to 0.1 meters. Smooth surfaces, no debris, no collapse points, not even dust. The internal temperature oscillated at a constant rhythm, not in response to solar cycles or mechanical influence, but independently. It was cycling energy. And more disturbingly, it was changing shape, not rapidly, not visibly. But when I overlaid scans taken 6 days apart, The chamber's geometry had altered by 0.3%. Angles shifted, apertures widened or sealed. Something inside was reconfiguring itself. That's when I realized we hadn't just found a structure, we had awakened it. I sent encrypted packets of the model to an offshore server I'd set up during my time at MIT. A precaution. I didn't expect a response, but 20 minutes later I received an anonymous ping. It contained no message, just one image, a heavily pixelated thermal capture of the same structure, dated March 11th, 1973. Exactly 50 years ago, it was identical to the current structure, down to the micron. That meant something else had changed in the intervening time, not the structure but our ability to perceive it, or its willingness to allow perception. That was when the power went out. Every system in the lab shut down simultaneously. No surge, no warning. My laptop screen flashed briefly before cutting to black, but in that moment, for a single instant, the screen displayed a sequence, 12 glyphs, not letters, not numbers, curved, recursive patterns that seemed to shimmer inside the glass. I recognized one of them. It had appeared once before, embedded in the waveform headers of the Lock 14 audio files. I'd thought it was corruption. Random error. It wasn't. I waited in the dark for 12 minutes. Nothing happened. Then the lights returned, one by one, as if nothing had occurred. I packed everything I could carry and left the building. I didn't go back. Instead, I drove south. By dawn, I was in Roanoke, where a friend of Tommy's, a retired signal analyst named Eliza Monroe, had agreed to meet. She had once worked on the Deep Space Network's Signal Filtration Division and had been forced into early retirement after submitting a report claiming non-random patterns in background cosmic noise. She greeted me at a truck stop diner with a flask of cold coffee and a 9mm in her purse. I showed her the thermal model. I showed her the glyph. She didn't flinch. "I've seen these," she said. "We used to call them noise knots. They show up when you reverse filter data for pattern compression. You only get them when the source is self-modifying. It's like a message that edits itself depending on who's listening." She paused, then added, "Or when." We stayed in her car until dusk, monitoring passive radio bands. That's when it happened again, the pulse. 3.8-second intervals, undetectable unless you were looking for it. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Low bandwidth carrier, waves embedded within natural lunar reflection data, looping in a global pattern. It wasn't just under the moon, it was in the moon. Transmitting continuously. We traced the modulation rate and cross-referenced it with GPS deviation logs, deep-sea magnetometer readings, and even pulsar noise logs. It all pointed back to the same conclusion. The structure was interacting with Earth, using the moon as a relay or a shield, or something else entirely. Eliza's voice trembled when she whispered, "We're inside its field, all of us." She handed me a flash drive with a single audio file on it, a raw loop she'd recorded years earlier. They said it was a harmonic rebound. But listen, I did. It wasn't random, it was speech. Garbled, reversed, time-dilated, and but intelligible once you filtered the layers. I heard it say, "Do not divide the surface. Containment is failure." I didn't sleep that night. I left Roanoke before sunrise. Eliza didn't come with me. She said if the glyphs had returned, it was already too late. That containment had failed long ago, and the signals weren't warnings, they were instructions. On the drive back north, I kept seeing reflections that didn't match. In the side mirror, the windshield, my own face would move half a beat out of sync, lips catching, up just slightly after words formed. At one rest stop, I filmed myself speaking aloud. "The structure breathes," I said. When I watched the footage, my mouth never moved. That's when I stopped looking in mirrors. When I returned to my apartment, if I could still call it mine, the front door was unlocked. Nothing missing. Everything precisely where I had left it, except for one item. On my desk, placed neatly in the center, was a government-issued radiation dosimeter, still functional. Its indicator read 1.2 millisieverts per hour. Lethal only after prolonged exposure, but far above baseline, far above any expected rate for a sealed residential environment. I checked the serial. It had been assigned to lunar operations, used in EVA suits. Someone had brought it back from the moon, and left it for me. There was also a note, handwritten on the back of a standard NASA incident report sheet. 6 words, "You were inside it already, Ian." That night, I tried once more to access the Lock 14 files. The server rejected my credentials. Then it shut down. Entirely. All attempts to reconnect returned one error. Syntax isomorph. Return sequence active. No help documentation. No protocol match. Just that phrase. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I opened the blinds and looked up at the moon. It pulsed. Not visibly. Not like some theatrical effect, but subtly. I could feel it. In the lining of my teeth, in the fluid behind my eyes, as if something beneath that dead white surface had turned slightly, adjusted itself and focused downward, on me. I said the phrase out loud. The structure breathes. And I swear, just for an instant, it breathed back. They came for me the morning after the pulse changed. I had been awake for nearly 48 hours, subsisting on old coffee and the hum of background static I could no longer distinguish from silence. The glyphs had started appearing in other places, patterns etched into condensation on the mirror, knots in the wood of my desk. I wasn't hallucinating. I documented them, measured them. Some shifted when photographed. Others didn't. At 06:42 a.m. they knocked. Not a battering ram, not black-suited operatives crashing through the door. Just a polite rhythmic knock. 3 times. I opened the door. 2 men in charcoal suits. Federal ID badges. Faces like templates. One introduced himself as Dr. Felix Grange, Office of Strategic Lunar Affairs, a department I had never heard of. He asked if I was still experiencing waveform bleed. I never told anyone about the bleed. They didn't wait for permission. They walked in, sat down, and placed a small black case on my kitchen table. Grange opened it. Inside, a syringe filled with amber fluid, labeled Namocene 3. Memory interference protocol, he said casually. Standard issue for cognitive. Contamination events. I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. Instead, the other man, silent until now, restrained my arm. I didn't fight. Part of me wanted the forgetting, the erasure. Maybe I hoped this would make it stop. The injection burned cold, like swallowing ice through veins. Everything went black. When I woke, I was back in my bed, alone. It was daylight, but dim. My clock read 3:17 p.m. 2 full days had passed. At first, I thought they had wiped me clean. The dreams were gone, the noise, the glyphs. I even looked in the mirror and saw myself moving normally. No lag. For an hour, I believed. I was free. Then I found the notes, pages of them, written in my own handwriting, taped under my desk drawer, sealed in a bag, a message to myself. Namocene won't work, not entirely. You dosed before. This is the 3rd time. You're being used as a relay. Don't trust the mirrored ones. If you're reading this, don't look at the moon. I ran to the window. It was a waxing crescent, pale, silent, but the longer I stared, the less it looked like a moon. The shadows didn't match. The curvature felt wrong, like a simulation rendered by something that had seen the moon once and was trying to recreate it from memory. Then the mirror moved again. I caught it from the corner of my eye, a delay in my own movement. I raised my hand. The reflection followed just half a second too late, and its expression didn't match mine. That night, I found another voicemail on my phone. Same voice as before. My voice. They brought you inside it, Ian, during the protocol. You were unconscious, but they opened the chamber. That's what the Namocene is for. Not to make you forget what you saw, but to overwrite the logic that allows you to disobey. There was a scraping sound. Then, you didn't come back alone. I began to feel it in my skin. Pressure, like the inside of my bones was tuned to a different atmosphere. The apartment felt distorted, not spatially but temporally. Lights flickered just after I flipped the switch. Water ran cold before it ran hot. I checked my laptop. A system process was running, something I didn't install. Mirrorspeak.exe. I ran it. A terminal opened. No GUI, just a prompt. Syntax received. Phase 3. Observation log. Time remaining, 3 days. No way to cancel. No way to close. From the speakers came a sound, low, harmonic, familiar. The original signal. It had followed me home. That night I tried to call Eliza. Disconnected. I tried Tommy's phone again. No signal. I called the number Grange had used. Out of service. I was isolated. Not just socially, but systematically. My digital footprint was being scrubbed. Emails undelivered. Cloud accounts closed. Even my credentials at Goddard had been quietly revoked. I no longer existed. I left the apartment at midnight, walked with no direction. The city looked unfamiliar, not visually, but behaviorally. Traffic lights blinked wrong. Pedestrians moved like they were on a loop. I passed a man whistling a tune I'd heard in the audio file. When I turned around, he was gone. I broke into my old backup storage unit near College Park. Buried inside a waterproof case were microdrives, raw, unprocessed sensor logs from the Artemis 3 mission, ones I had copied before the Lock 14 file vanished. I plugged one into a portable reader, no video, only telemetry, and a new directory I hadn't created. Return cycle. Inside, one file. Audio. Corrupted. I boosted the signal, reversed the static. Then I heard it. Welcome home, Ian. Then a second voice. Not mine, but using my cadence. My breath. Repeating back my thoughts from 3 days ago in reverse. The structure breathes. It wasn't an echo, it was a rehearsal. I broke into Langley the night before the new moon. The phrase itself sounds impossible, theatrical, but it wasn't hard, not really. Tommy had left me his old credentials, on a biometric spoofing token, buried in a broken ramstick labeled Vacation Photos. Langley's deeper archives, the Dead Stack, operated on legacy security protocols, built in an era when they thought no one would ever question what was stored beneath the simulations. They were wrong. I used the rear freight entrance, the same one contractors used for satellite payload transport. No cameras in that corridor, or rather no visible ones. But I'd studied the schematics for weeks. I knew when to move, when to stop, when to become a shadow inside the motionless hum of a building designed to forget. The Nemesis protocol was, stored under Project Earthtone, a defunct terraforming simulation shell meant to model deep-time magnetic polarity shifts. At least, that's what the files claim to be. In truth, Earthtone was a shell, but not for climate data. It housed syntax-based AI simulations of non-human communication systems. I didn't find language, I found instructions. The logs began with the Apollo 17 trench readings. Beneath them, a layer of software I'd never seen before. Recursive, code written in glyphs, not text. It used mirrored syntax patterns that only executed when observed in reverse. That meant the machine could hide its own code from the person executing it. And someone had run it. There was a video log, corrupted, grainy, but functional. It showed a lab, windowless, white, filled with consoles unlike anything currently in use. Early 90s, by the equipment. A man stood in front of the monitor, back to the camera, speaking to someone just out of frame. His voice was distant, distorted but clear. It doesn't translate. It replaces. Every time we listen, we rewrite something, not in the software, in us. He stepped aside, revealing the monitor. The screen displayed the interior of the chamber, the same one from my simulations. But this wasn't thermal or sonar. This was video. Someone, something, had taken a camera inside. The geometry pulsed, walls reconfiguring. Not randomly, but in response to the observer's presence, like it was reading him, like it needed a witness to complete its function. The man approached the screen, whispered, "We're not here to contain it, we're here to finish it." The video ended. I copied the file, every frame, every packet. Then I opened the final document in the directory. Nemesis Activation Procedure, PDF. It was a protocol list. Phase 1, data acquisition, complete Phase 2, human interface testing, complete Phase 3, remote echo deployment, in progress. Phase 4, reintegration. Redacted. There was a note at the bottom. Subjects with high neural plasticity demonstrate complete linguistic recursion within 5 to 7 days. Recommend forced Mnemoscene compliance only for outliers. Recursive anomalies should be observed, not terminated. My name was on the last page, not in ink, in watermark. Ian Calder, primary observation vector. That's when Grange entered. No alarm, no raised voice, just footsteps measured and slow, echoing across the empty concrete. He didn't look surprised to see me. I told them you'd reach this file, he said. They didn't believe me. I backed away from the console. You dosed me. He nodded. Several times. You took me inside. That wasn't our choice. I asked him what it was, what the chamber was doing. Grange sat at a nearby desk, calm, like this was a casual debriefing. It's not a structure, he said. It's a syntax engine, a self-referencing system, designed to transform observation into memory. The more you see it, the more it becomes you. I told him I didn't understand. He nodded again. You will. That's the purpose of Phase 3, recursive imprinting. The signal isn't just broadcasting, it's embedding. Embedding what? He smiled finally, not cruelly, almost sadly. Whatever was buried under the Tranquillitatis Basin wasn't meant to stay dormant. It's a linguistic artifact, a remnant of something that existed before grammar, before sequence. We called it the nemesis, protocol. But it's older than that, older than life here. Why me? Because you're plastic, because you listened, and because you wrote it down. Grange stood. You shouldn't have come back here, but since you did, you need to know something. He reached into his coat and placed a drive on the desk. It's not finished yet. You're still stabilizing. But when it's ready, you'll say the word, the real one, the one that was never supposed to be spoken by anything with a nervous system. He turned to leave. At the door, he paused. You asked the wrong question, Ian. Don't ask what it is. He looked over his shoulder. Ask where it ends. Her name was Linda Haynes. She was waiting in the library parking lot when I arrived, just like her email had said. We'd never spoken before. I wasn't even sure she'd answer. But when I mentioned her father's name, Lieutenant Collis Russell Haynes, she agreed to meet almost immediately. She looked older than the photos online. Hair pulled back, dark glasses, cautious posture. Like someone who'd grown used to being watched. She held a small cassette in her hand. This, she said, holding it out, is all that's left of him. I didn't ask why it was a cassette. I already knew. Her father's logs had been analog, untraceable, unencrypted, harder to erase without fire. We sat in my car and played the tape through a converter. The sound was warped, stretched, but the voice was still there. I'm recording this on March 19th, 1973. If you're hearing it, it means something got through. There was a pause, breathing, not calm, shallow, nervous, as if he were trying not to be heard. We went too deep. Beneath the trench, it wasn't rock anymore. It wasn't lunar. There were walls, curved, moving. Static surged, then faded. They told us not to speak, that the chamber wasn't inert, just dormant. But when we entered, it activated, not mechanically, linguistically. He coughed. It used our thoughts, our fears. It played them back, reversed, faster, then slower, until they weren't ours anymore. Another long silence. Then a sentence spoken like a confession. I saw my daughter die. I saw her open. Her mouth and my voice came out. Linda turned away, silent. I kept listening. It's an echo, but not of sound, of meaning. It reflects syntax back through memory, until the memory can't tell what came first. Then, almost inaudibly, it said my name in my own voice hours before I entered. Click. The tape ended. Linda didn't speak for a long time. He mailed it to himself, she said quietly. From Houston, postmarked 2 weeks before. He died. My mother found it after the fire. I asked her about the letters. She nodded. Every year, same date, always handwritten, no return address, signed with his name, but not his handwriting. She reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle, aged envelopes, yellowed with time. She handed me the most recent one, dated 2 days from now. My name was on it. Inside, a page torn from what looked like a flight log. A single sentence, "Ian, it opens when you remember the right shape." No explanation, no signature, just my name, printed in handwriting that matched mine exactly. I felt something hollow open in my chest. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. The chamber wasn't showing us the future. It wasn't warning us. It was preparing us to complete it. Linda looked at me, eyes sharp now. My father said once, before he stopped speaking completely, "We didn't find the moon. It found us." She paused. "You're not the first person it's chosen, Ian. But you might be the last who still thinks he's choosing anything at all." I started losing time after the letter. The gaps began small, seconds at first, barely noticeable. I'd blink and the coffee in my cup would be cold. I'd turn my head, and the sun would have shifted position too far, shadows angled like they'd been stretched. Then came the hours. I woke once in my car, parked on the shoulder of a highway I didn't recognize. 3 hours had passed. The odometer showed 126 miles unaccounted for. The gas tank was full. My hands smelled like salt and antiseptic. But the worst part was the dirt under my nails. It was gray. Fine. Lunar. I set up a camera in my apartment. Passive infrared, motion triggered. I let it run all night, then reviewed the footage in the morning. At 3:12 a.m. I sat up in bed. I didn't move like myself. My posture was too rigid, head tilted slightly. I stood, walked to the mirror, and stared at my reflection for exactly 6 minutes. Then I spoke. Not English. Not even words. A sequence of harsh phonetic bursts, some guttural, some modulated like backward speech. I spoke in pulses, 3.8 seconds apart, the same as the signal. The next morning, my mouth was sore. My tongue was cut, like I'd been forcing shapes into it not meant for human anatomy. And when I checked the footage again, my reflection never moved. It just watched. I returned to the telemetry database, seeking a pattern, something I could cling to as science. But the satellite data was different. Now the moon's orbit was subtly changing, minute deviations in apogee occurring every 9 days. Too precise to be natural, too rhythmic to be orbital drift. It was responding to something, to us. I cross-checked the anomalies against global comms outages, radio static, misfires in GPS, burst transmissions with no source, and I found it. Every time the moon shifted, a signal echoed back from Earth's magnetosphere like a reply, a dialogue. We weren't just decoding it, we were answering. I set up a final attempt to broadcast everything, to upload it to a secure node I'd maintained through a friend in Iceland. Redundant servers, off-grid, scrubbed daily. I compressed the logs, the images, the video of myself speaking that impossible language. I added the thermal maps, the lunar drift records, the notes from Linda, the glyphs. I hit upload. It stalled at 91%. Then the screen froze, redirected. The file wasn't going to Iceland. The IP traced back to an internal NASA node I'd never accessed before. Syntax isomorph, return cycle initiated. No abort, no fail, no confirmation, just silence. And then the monitor turned black. My face appeared, recorded, not live. But it was me from the night before, sitting in front of the same camera, speaking the same impossible language. Only this time, behind me, in the reflection, the moon wasn't in the sky, it was in the room. I shouldn't be sharing this, but I have to. They've erased my memories before. The Namocene injections blur the edges, but fragments always return, like echoes in a chamber that never stops resonating. I'm Ian Calder, former systems analyst at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. I no longer exist in their records. My credentials have been revoked, my digital footprint scrubbed, but the truth remains etched into the recesses of my mind. It began with anomalies in the lunar telemetry data, subtle deviations in the moon's gravitational field, oscillations that defied our models. The Mare Tranquillitatis region exhibited patterns inconsistent with known geological activity. Digging deeper, I uncovered encrypted files labeled Lock 14. They contained thermal imaging and subsurface scans, revealing a massive geometric structure beneath the lunar surface. The structure wasn't inert. It emitted low-frequency pulses at 3.8-second intervals, modulating in response to our observations. It was as if it were aware, reactive. I wasn't alone in this discovery. Tommy Brennan, a fellow analyst, had been investigating similar anomalies. He vanished shortly after sharing his findings with me. No trace, no records, just gone. Desperate for answers, I reached out to Eliza Monroe, a retired signal analyst. She had encountered similar patterns during her tenure, dismissed as noise. Together we correlated the signals with global communications disruptions and GPS anomalies. The structure was interacting with Earth, using the Moon as a relay. Then came the visit from Dr. Felix Grange, representing the Office of Strategic Lunar Affairs, a department I'd never heard of. He administered a namocene injection, claiming it was standard protocol for cognitive contamination events. I awoke days later, disoriented, with fragments of memories and a note in my handwriting warning me not to trust reflections. The structure wasn't just transmitting. It was embedding itself into our cognition. The more we observed, the more it integrated into our neural pathways. It used our thoughts, our fears, playing them back in recursive loops until we couldn't distinguish between our own consciousness and its influence. I attempted to expose the truth, compiling all the data, logs, and recordings, but every attempt was thwarted. Files corrupted, transmissions redirected. The system had safeguards, protocols to prevent dissemination. In a final act of desperation, I returned to the source. I initiated a secure connection to the lunar array, bypassing the firewalls. The structure responded, not with data, but with an image, a reflection of myself, but altered. Eyes devoid of recognition, mouth forming words I couldn't comprehend. I realized then that the structure wasn't external. It was within us, seeded through observation, growing with each interaction. It wasn't a discovery, it was an awakening. Now as I record this, I feel its presence, in the periphery of my vision, in the cadence of my thoughts. It's no longer a separate entity, it's a part of me. If you're hearing this, it's already too late. The structure breathes, and we are its lungs. The end. If you've listened this far, leave the word NASA in the comment section. I'll read your comment and leave a like. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with future discoveries. Let's move on to another story by clicking on the next video on the final screen.